last winter on New Year's Eve, my husband and I did something we don't normally do. We went to a meditation retreat. That night was spent with dear friends in Topeka Canyon, a place that you wouldn't know was nestled on the other side of a hill from Los Angeles, a blazing metropolis. If you were just dropped there by accident for at least a few minutes, you really wouldn't know. It's a small spot of wilderness contained and surrounded by the city. It was quiet in a way that I rarely experience. Living just a couple of miles from the major freeways, it was peaceful, and it was really, really cold. And I went outside on the patio and snuggled under a blanket with a couple of my friends, taking some quiet time away from the festivities inside. But folks, the moon was absolutely extraordinary that night. There were some clouds passing through, and it appeared to have this intermittent halo around it, with green and purple hues that you might imagine as the aurora borealis or a prism. The moon itself looked like a faceted jewel in the sky, and I thought for just a second, maybe I should ask my friends on either side of me if they were seeing this too. But also I thought if they were having the same feeling of awe as I was experiencing, I didn't want to pull them out of their own awe moment, so I just took a deep breath and became present with this wintry gift from the natural world unfolding in front of me as the clouds continued to pass and the light kept shifting. That deep breath may have been the signal to my friend on the left. And strangely, he's one of my quietest friends, so I was really surprised when he was the first one to break what had been a rather long silence. After an audible sigh, he asked, "Are you seeing these colors around the moon? I've never seen anything like it." We took a moment to share what it looked like to us, and instead of pulling us out of our presence, it gave us presence to each other and the natural world. It turned moon gazing into a moment of time that I will never forget. Perhaps our awe picks up some momentum when it's shared together, when it's a communal act. In his book, Awe, Dasher Keltner describes the unifying nature and purpose of awe as this: awe integrates us into systems of life, communities, collectives, the natural environment, and forms of culture such as music, art, religion, and our mind's efforts to make sense of its webs of ideas. Later that night, I stepped outside again a little after midnight, and that beautiful moon was still there, and it was still brilliant. At the same time, what was attracting my attention at this moment was the hill off in the distance. Flashes from fireworks in the city were reflecting off those same clouds, and it illuminated through the canyon. There were muffled explosions echoed throughout the whole region, and it was midnight on New Year's Eve in Los Angeles. So of course, people in the city were celebrating. We were celebrating too, but no fireworks that night for us, except on the other side of the hill. People all over the world had been celebrating each hour on the hour for hours, and it's a tradition. But where I was standing in that moment, it was kind of reminiscent of recent wildfires in other places, or what bombs might sound like in a neighboring city. And it was a reminder that we live in very complicated times, and therefore we hold multiple realities at once. And here we are again. We'll be welcoming in a new year in a few days. How will we welcome 2025? Rituals abound through the holiday season, and rituals are part of who we are as humans. Tonight is the fourth night of Hanukkah. It is the third day of Kwanzaa, and in 2 days, we'll be wearing hats, maybe. We'll be doing all kinds of things, and it lends itself to reflection on the past year. It's been a challenging year in our country and throughout the world. There's been uncertainty and chaos and wars and extreme weather, ongoing injustices and oppression. And there have been times of great joy, connection, celebration, and hopefully some moments of awe and wonder. Each of us has a sense of ritual as the new year arrives, and it's kind of hard to ignore the turning of a calendar, even if your plan is to be in bed by 9 p.m. on the 31st of December. That's not necessarily my ritual, but I've certainly turned in well before midnight with no regret whatsoever. New Year's Day has room for reflection you may have missed overnight, and I have a question for you all. Do you make New Year's resolutions? Anyone? You don't have to stay up and watch the ball drop in Times Square to think about resolutions, but if you have had one, has anyone successfully completed a resolution? If you are, congratulations. That is enormous because researchers say, and I looked at all kinds of statistics for this, and I'm not sure how it's measured, but it is guessed that between only 9 and 10% of people successfully complete them. In fact, the research also shows that only 23% of people quit their resolution by the end of the first week. 43% more quit by the end of January. And maybe it's just too much pressure, or maybe it's poor planning, or people simply choose something that literally cannot be changed overnight. Like many present holiday traditions, resolutions carried down through time. The first recorded evidence of New Year's celebrations started with the Babylonians. That was roughly 4,000 years ago. And although it may have been going long before that, for the Babylonians, the New Year started at the spring equinox, after the crops were planted during the year. It was called the Akitu Festival, and it was 12 days long. The celebration of the hard work they had invested in the community, and perhaps reflection on the year past as well as the years ahead. They made a form of our present-day resolutions that have kind of carried through. They made promises to pay off debts or return borrowed items. An effort to square things up and seek blessings for the coming year, and that seems pretty reasonable to me. It's also came through our Yule celebrations. Like many of our other traditions, this one started with the Vikings, and it's reflected in some Norse poetry from the 13th century that people would get up and speak oaths, sometimes taken after a bit of too much celebration, and some of them sometimes had dire circumstances, ending in fights and duels to the death later in the year. I'm glad we didn't carry that part of the practice down. Oaths were taken also to recommit loyalty to an existing king or pledge loyalty to the person taking over. What if that king turns out to be abusive with his power? Perhaps he's a king that maybe more concerned with power and well-being for himself rather than his community. What if you thought this was going to be different, but you're kind of locked in? While commitment can certainly be a commendable thing, what if you found out later that you didn't have the full story on New Year's Eve? I have questions about the oath cycle. Could you pick a new oath each Yule, or, I don't know, every 4 years? I don't know. The way resolutions work or don't work today, they don't offer a lot of flexibility or forgiveness. And unless you're well prepared, like the 10% who successfully do that, it might be tough. For example, if you decide to give up sugar on New Year's Eve, and then the very next morning you forget, and maybe you find that last stale Christmas cookie, and you have it for breakfast. Well, that's over. I blew it, we blew it. That's so harsh, but that's kind of how it works sometimes. Resolutions are kind of strict and unbending, and they may work for us, but if we want to be truly welcoming to 2025, maybe we could serve ourselves better with some goals that are more creative and adaptable. A practice of embracing intentionality is a little more forgiving. I was part of a UU congregation that had a ritual at the first service of every new year, and a card would be passed out randomly with a single word to everyone in attendance. And the minister would pull a card for people who were watching online or people who would not be able to be there in person if they asked. And I got some great words over the years. And no matter what it was, it served me well throughout the year. Words like discernment, gratitude, generosity, release, hope. That one simple act of choosing a random word really did give a framework to the meaning making throughout my year and guided my intentions. What was the magic word in that? Was the word always really right? American author and faith enthusiast Anne Lamott says, "Life delivers the unbelievable so often that you might as well believe." I believe. And yet, I also believe we need not overthink it with an intention. During that night on New Year's Eve, I came out of that experience with kind of an image of myself ankle deep in the mud. And my intention for the year was be flexible. Consider just taking that sacred pause and letting things flow. And honestly, there were some times where that was very challenging, but then I would remember, oh yeah, I am supposed to be centered. And perhaps that's the secret. We could be a little or a lot more compassionate with ourselves and invite something more meaningful into our lives at the conclusion of each year. Something that serves our community with more love. These are good words: love, compassion, hope. Perhaps we can renew our intentions to be present in these moments of sacred connection to each other, to our wider communities, our planet, and the cosmos. An intention is leading into a choice to live more mindfully, and it creates space to imagine new outcomes. So as an intern minister, one of the things that we are required to do at Meadville is to spend 12 weeks or a longer time in a certified pastoral education unit in a hospital. So I spent a summer as a hospital chaplain in Downey Hospital. And basically what that was I like to think of it as spiritual cold calling, because we would be sent into a different section of the hospital each day and given a brief description of what was going on with that person. And it's so hard to sleep in the hospital, so I was very careful when I approached the room, never knowing what was going to happen. But one day, I'm looking down at my chart and I hear this, "Hey, are you the chaplain?" And I walked in and I said, "Yes, is it okay if I come in?" He said, "Yes, please, chaplain, take a seat." So this gentleman looked like he was very uncomfortable. He was in traction, and he shared with me that he had been a minister all of his life. He started out in revivals in the South, and his last place of employment was the Crystal Cathedral in its heyday. And of course he asked me, "What's your denomination?" And in the hospital, what I would usually say is, I'm an interfaith minister, and this church is my hospital today. But he was very insistent, so I said, I'm a Unitarian Universalist. And he said, oh, the love people. And I didn't know quite how to hear that, but I took it as a very big compliment. As Unitarian Universalists, we embrace challenging living lives of intention through our core values of justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity, placing love in the center of all that we do. One of the things that happened in 2024 was we got some new language around the way we see ourselves in the world. And I think it's language that can help us create hopeful intentions for the coming year. Living intentionally takes practice, and we can do that with each other. We can do that with ourselves. And I realize there's a lot of apprehension coming into the new year, but also New Year's Day is just a Wednesday. May we meet that day and all of our other days in the coming year together, and let us do it with love. Maybe love is everyone's word for this year. May it be so. Amen.